A few warning signs must have been there, but no one could have predicted the drama that was about to unfold.
Those are the news headlines. And now the shipping forecast today, Sunday the 6th of September. There are warnings of gales in Plymouth.
Dave was on his milk round in Sennan. Bev was giving the morning feed to her horses.
Trigger! Scarlet!
Showers, good, becoming moderate. Plymouth, southerly 5 to 7, increasing gale 8 in the west for a time.
Adrian was overseeing the milking. And Roy was en route to a building job. They are all volunteer coastguards based at Land's End. Living and working at the tip of England, where it can be sunshine one minute and gales the next, they knew only too well just how quickly the weather can change and the dangers it can cause.
Southwesterly 7 to severe gale 9, showers moderate.
Red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. It really does mean that the weather is coming bad and a good forecast of how the weather's going to change.
We're only about a mile from the sea in any direction, so we can get all sorts of inklings that the weather's going to change. Be the sound of the sea, birds maybe coming into land, seagulls that we'd never normally see.
Generally, people are not aware of how dangerous the changing conditions can be. I personally am very, very respectful of the sea. I've seen what it can do to people. I think people should treat the sea as a dangerous friend. It's an excellent place to have fun, to sail, to boat, to surf, but treat it with respect, because it will kill you if you don't.
In this programme, we meet a man who nearly lost his own life whilst trying to save his son from the sea. It brought together all the major coastal rescue services, the Search and Rescue Squadron from Culdrose, coastguards from different parts of Cornwall, lifeboatmen from Port Isaac, who have all helped us reconstruct the events of that day. It was a day that was to see two of the lifeboatmen become casualties, and they in turn found themselves the focus of a major rescue featured on the evening news. The story begins on the coastline near Willer Park Hotel, which has been run by Nick and Liz Leeds for 16 years. It's an idyllic spot and a wonderful place to bring up children with the coastline as their back garden. Although they've both had children from previous partners, James is the only child of their marriage.
It started off a lovely sunny day like this, and when my son first went down to the beach, it was quite beautiful, but the weather suddenly changed.
We went down the beach because it was really hot, and we walked down and we were just like holding on to this chain and the water goes over you. This huge wave came, it just swept James off.
Got bashed about a little bit and the waves were dumping on me and there was a massive current going outwards. And while that was happening, the waves were dumping on me sort of thing. And then I saw a big one coming and it just washed me into the cave.
In Port Isaac, 5 miles away, Mike and Nikki Edkins were spending time with their 3 children.
Can you read it to me?
Mike is a volunteer lifeboatman. He also runs a pub in the village called the Golden Lion. He had no idea when he went down to check on things later that afternoon that the next shout he answered would almost cost him his life.
You do something that not everybody gets a chance to do. You've got the ability, you've got the confidence, and you get something out of it, you know, when you do a good job. Everybody, Coast Guard, lifeboat, helicopter crews, we've all got together and we've saved somebody's life.
There was a little hole, and I just climbed up there. And the waves are still coming in and getting me soaking wet and hitting me against the rocks.
Back at the hotel, Nick and Liz were sorting out dinner bookings, completely unaware of their son's predicament.
Yeah. Did you see the inquiry I took earlier for the new year?
When James's friend came up from the sea to tell us that James had been swept off this rock, he was sobbing and crying and very distraught, and he'd also just run all the way up the hill, which is pretty steep, so he was gasping for breath as well. Liz got on the phone straight away and shouted at me to go down to the beach, and I raced down. It was very slippery and I wasn't really dressed for racing across the cliffs. I just couldn't get down there quick enough. I was just desperate because I didn't know what I was going to see when I got down there. I sort of looked all around to see if I could see James, thinking that I'd see him somewhere in the water. The sea was really rough. I couldn't see him anywhere. Sheer terror, I guess. I had this feeling that maybe he'd managed to get to this cave. And so I stripped off my clothes down to my underpants and threw them down on the rocks and just dived in. I did consider for seconds whether it was a sensible thing to do, but I just had to try. I couldn't do nothing. I couldn't go back up and tell my wife that I couldn't find him. I had to do something.
Well, boys, well done, well done. Child in the water at Bossini Cove.
I was with the children. I was just getting them ready for bed, and I heard the maroons go off, and I thought, just our luck, he's going to go out. We've only just got home from a wedding, and every time we go away he ends up going out on the lifeboat. So I just thought, there he is, he's gone, he won't be home tonight.
The weather when we left was good. It was just a swell running, but there was no problems. As we rounded Tintagel Head, it sort of headland tides me and it chops up a lot, so we slowed down.
I was being dumped on by these huge waves, and I shouted at the top of my voice, "God help me!" And immediately this big wave came and picked me up and took me straight into the cave. And I do believe that I did have a little bit of help there. I got into the cave and I was clinging onto this rock for dear life, and this voice came to me, "Hello, Dad, I love you, Dad." It was like a miracle. It was a wonderful feeling, because I really thought we'd lost him.
Port Isaac Lifeboat. Port Isaac Lifeboat. This is Port Isaac Boathouse. Over. There is a child and an adult.
Boathouse, this is Lifeboat. Message understood.
Couldn't see anything. And then we thought the only other place it could be is in a cave. So we looked at 2 caves, had a quick look in them, nothing. Then we went to the largest of the caves, put the anchor out. I bent down, had a look, and I could see the father of James in the back of the cave.
When I saw the lifeboat arriving, we were still up in the roof of the cave, and so I had a clear view of it coming in. And as soon as I saw it, I knew that there was no way it was going to reach us.
We picked a moment to go in there. We didn't just go in, we had a good look round, we thought about it, looked, and thought, right, okay, we've got a break here, let's go in.
When they came, I thought, And this is good because they're professional, they'll be able to help us properly, but they can't really get to us because it was still too rough.
If people know anything about the sea, they know that things always come in sets, and they, you know, big waves will wash through, and then you'll get a lull for 5, 10, 15 minutes sometimes, and that's that break that you need to go in and do something. That was the situation, but we didn't realise that the weather was worsening. But a big swell came, it was swamped us, killed the engine. Me and Kevin ended up in the water. Paul stayed in the boat. How he stayed in the boat, I'll never know, you know.
The 2 lifeboatmen were swept in, one of them very close to me. In fact, I pulled him out of the water. And from then on, they were just as helpless as we were, and obviously just as frightened as we were. And you know, from then on, they were just fighting for their lives just as we were fighting for ours.
On September the 6th last year, a major coastal rescue was underway at Bossiney Cove near Tintagel. 4 people were trapped in a cave by the relentless seas. Coast Guards from over 4 different centres were on site, combining their experience to try and get the casualties out alive. Mike North, the sector manager from Land's End, was one.
There was no communication. It was very frustrating that although at one point we did hear some cries from the cave, which meant that somebody was alive, we had no idea who it was or what condition they were in.
The conditions in the cave were quite horrendous. Every moment, every minute that we were in there, we were fighting for our lives.
It was dark and really cold, and the rocks were jagged and horrible.
I'd lost sight of Kevin then, Kevin had lost sight of me, and we're both being washed in and around here. Obviously there's a lot more water in here.
When I got washed out of the boat, driven in here by the sea, and got wedged, and Nick and James Leeds were just about a metre above me here, directly above me, and this is the closest I could get to them.
The pressure was so great. When the waves came in, everything went black, and then we just waited for the wave to hit us.
I remember being picked up by a wave, and then I just slammed into here. Obviously more and more waves are coming in, and every time a wave came in, it would just like wedge me in even further.
One of these points, my shoulder was smashed and dislocated, and then I was in real trouble because I was finding it very difficult to climb back up again.
By this time, the Coast Guards had rigged lines down the cliff. One of the first Coast Guards on the scene was Frank Prescott, who was appointed first cliff man. They decided to make a descent.
I got down just below the mouth of the cave and could just see the stern of the lifeboat. At that point, a larger than normal wave washed me off from my position. I lost the radio and my footing, and we aborted that attempt, and I was pulled out of there.
The force of the sea hitting me was just taking every little bit of energy out, and legs were going numb, and it came to one point where I just thought to myself, this is going to be it.
It was getting very tough. In fact, at one point when I was in the water, I called up to James to tell him that I couldn't get out and that he was on his own, he'd have to make it on his own, because I really didn't think I was going to survive at that point.
I was cut to pieces, and it was very scary.
I just had no energy left. I was, thinking of Nicky and the kids and stuff, and this is it, I've had a good life.
I heard the doorbell ring and I went to the door, and I opened the door and there was 3 people stood there that I knew. There was 2 people to do with the lifeboat and a good friend of mine, and just the look on their faces, I just thought, they're going to tell me he's dead. And I almost shut the door in their faces.
About an hour later, Roy Copeman arrived. He and Frank had only been coastguards for 2.5 years. They'd worked as cliffmen in training, but had never experienced an actual rescue of this magnitude.
Looking down from the top at the state of the sea, I really couldn't understand how anyone could survive there, not particularly from the drowning point of view, but from just the ferocity of the sea. I mean, anyone in that sea amongst rocks would have got, you just smashed to pieces.
I remember looking around. I seen one of the helicopter crew on the end of the wire, and he had a life jacket in his hand. And I think he could see me and I could see him. And I think he sort of waved the life jacket like that, and I was going, no way that'll come in here. Forget it.
We were down on the cliff path and I saw the winchman over the cave actually shake his head and put his thumb down, and I just thought that was it.
I just thought, this can't be happening to me, everything's going wrong. And I remember that feeling of almost, and your legs go under you, and it's like everything's sort of spinning. You can't take in what's happening. Just the fear of losing somebody that you love so desperately is just terrifying.
Shortly after that we were moved. We were actually asked to go in because the weather was getting worse, and I really thought that was the end.
I remember arriving at the boathouse and everybody just looked at me, and it's almost like you're not yourself. I remember looking at people thinking, they don't know what to say to me. They're looking for my reaction, and I felt like I didn't have a reaction.
By this time, the 3rd lifeboatman, Paul Pollington, had been winched up to safety. He stayed on the cliff top to help, but the capsized lifeboat was still thrashing about in the sea, swept nearer to the mouth of the cave with every wave.
One big wave came in, it picked the boat up, and it just came barreling straight towards me. I thought, I hope it's quick. I knew if it hit me, I thought it's going to kill me stone dead. I was at the point where I think I wanted it. I was, I don't really want to drown. I put my arm up, turned my head around like that. I remember feeling it hit me. I remember feeling my ribs go. I remember that. And it just popped me out it unwedged me, it hit me and shot me through this little gap that I was stuck in. And it was like being, I was like a cork out of a champagne bottle. Boom.
Not only did the lifeboat knock Mike out of his rock prison, it wedged itself in his place. Mike used it to climb higher towards Kevin to give himself a greater chance of survival as the cave filled up with water.
I remember just lying on the rocks and, hanging on, but lying sort of vertically like that. Kevin came down, grabbed me and helped pull me up. My life jacket was all twisted around, and I couldn't find my light or my cord to inflate the life jacket and things like that. But so we climbed up, and I got my breath back, sat down for a minute, took stock of the situation, and thought, we've got to get higher.
Nick and James had now been in the water for over 4 hours, and Kevin and Mike for 2. They were still in great danger.
My thoughts would probably be that if they were in trouble, the seas would bash them, render them unconscious against the rocks, and then they would probably drown if they fell back into the water.
The worst thing was the hypothermia. I was just so cold, and I was just shivering so violently.
There's nothing that anybody could have done to get into that cave, neither divers or anybody else. And we just had to wait until nature decreed that the tide would go out.
Me and Kevin worked it out that we were high water 7 o'clock. That's the maximum it's going to go to.
We didn't know that whether at high tide the cave would be totally filled with water and it wouldn't recede. So we always had this constant fear that the time would come when there wouldn't be any air at all.
Once we got past 7 o'clock, we thought, we've done it. We're out, this is it.
Mike and Kevin were right. The tide turned just after 7, but the conditions were still appalling. The Coast Guards waited for half an hour and then decided to make a second descent. This time, Frank and Roy went down together. No one knew what they might find in the cave, but they didn't want to leave it any longer for the sake of the casualties, whatever the risk to themselves.
I was worried about them because what we were basically doing was lowering them down over a couple 100 feet of cliff, over an overhang, into a cave where there was something like a 20-foot plus Atlantic swell coming in.
We came out through this little hole to be greeted by 2 lovely gentlemen that had abseiled down the cliffs from the Coast Guard.
I was just amazed, to see the faces appear over the top. Gobsmacked, really. I still think it's a miracle. I don't know how they survived.
As soon as the casualties were out, the search and rescue squadron moved into position.
Nick was obviously in big trouble. He'd got a serious shoulder injury and was shivering almost out of control. Put my arms around Nick and I was trying to talk to him. I was trying to reassure him, but I couldn't really understand what he was saying. And I don't think he could understand probably a lot of what I was saying, so it was a bit of a crazy conversation.
He was scraped and bruised and cut and so cold. Once his safety was, I'd got him on my safety strap, I just felt so sorry for him. We were hanging there for a little while to wait his turn to go in the helicopter, and I was in a soaking wet dry suit. I just got hold of him and cuddled him. I think it actually made him more. It might have made him more feel safe, I don't know.
He winched us up to the helicopter, and there's one point as I was dangling on the end of this line going up into the helicopter where I could feel all the heat from the engines, and it was absolutely wonderful. And I told them afterwards that if they'd have just left me hanging there under the helicopter, I'd have been really happy.
One by one, the casualties were winched up into the helicopter and then lowered onto the cliff top, where an ambulance drove them to hospital.
When we knew that all 4 were okay, when they were all in the helicopter and all away, there was a really great feeling of a job well done.
We instructed the cliff team that was on Frank's lines to bring him up alongside me, and I think we congratulated each other. And I turned round to Frank and said it was a bit of a baptism by fire, really. Your first real shout run, which it's mostly one of the biggest shouts I reckon that I will ever be involved in.
It was quite a shock to see James when I saw him for the first time in hospital, because neither of us realised how badly we'd been knocked about and battered.
I cracked some ribs, I twisted my knee, basically just felt like I'd done 15 rounds with Mike Tyson.
He just stood in the hall like a little boy, really, and I just thought, there he is, and he was really crying. He was really upset, but obviously really pleased. I suppose crying because he was so happy to be home. I just went over and just sort of cuddled up to him and sort of said, "You're home now," and it's hard to explain, really. You can to actually touch somebody that you thought you probably never touch again.
How we survived, I don't know. I think we were very lucky. I think we had a lot of help from someone up there who was looking out for us. I don't think we could have gone on much longer.
Mike is a